Hi sewing friends, welcome to my sewing room. My name is Beth, and if you're new, welcome. Today we're making a really simple bag using some leftover strips of fabric. Let's get started. I'm making my bag today because recently I showed these very easy bags I made for shopping using an old bench cover that had been made with strips. It actually was a hand-me-down to me, and I cut that bench cover up and made these bags. And I'll leave a link below to that short video. And someone asked how they could do the same thing. So I have to start from scratch today and make some strip sets using a lot of this leftover fabric I keep in a basket, and I sort of organize this basket. I call it my strip basket, and these are strips left over from making quilts. I try to make sure they're at least 12 or 15 inches long. I try to get long strips in here, and I'm going to press them before I begin working today. I sat down at my machine and I started sewing these strips together. They're all different sizes, they're all different widths, and they're different lengths. And some are a little crooked. They're not all straight, but I just went ahead and used what I had, and it's going to be quite an adventure to see what I can come up with these leftover strips. Ended up making 2 of these strip sets. They're each about 20 inches long, maybe, and about 14 inches wide with all the strips sewn together. So I'm going to straighten the edges, and I'm going to cut this chunk here pretty much in half. And I'll be using 3 of these little strip sets to make my bag today. Here are my 3 chunks of fabric. I have a little bit left over, but these are the 3 that I'll be using. They're about 11 inches wide and 14 inches tall, and I'm going to be sewing them together. Now, right now, they're not exactly the same height. I will be trimming after I get all 3 pieces together. Once I had my 3 pieces together and I trimmed everything up, I found some batting that is actually a fusible batting that was in my batting scraps. It was just the right size, and this older piece of fabric for the lining. I'm going to put all 3 pieces together, and there's the name of that fun fabric on the inside, an older piece of fabric. After I get all 3 together, I'm going to press. I don't use this kind of batting frequently, but it is kind of handy. All you have to do is put your quilt sandwich together and then you press. You do have to go slow and work in sections. If you're making a large quilt, it's a little more tricky, but I think if you start at one end or even start in the middle and work your way out from there, this kind of batting actually works pretty well. After pressing, I did insert some large safety pins to keep everything more stable. Now that my quilt sandwich is made, I'm just going to go along and quilt in some quilting lines. I'll follow along next to that seam, and then when I get to that next section, it kind of moves to another seam. I'm on the other side of that seam, but that's okay. I'm not looking for perfection with these quilting lines. I'm just kind of going through and following along those lines. For getting some lines quilted, I trimmed following the front of my bag, cutting away the excess backing and batting. Now I'm going to sew that side seam together, and in just a minute I'll show you what I do to get rid of those raw edges. Since this is so thick, I typically, when making a bag that doesn't have all this batting and everything, I will make a French seam, but I just thought this would be too thick to put a French seam in the side. After getting that seam in, I turned my bag right side out so I could decide where I want the sides to be, and I folded it so that I could see the front and back of what I prefer. Since you can kind of move it around, this doesn't have a side seam with those 3 sections, so I put that seam sort of on the side, towards the side, but not right on the side of the bag, which is actually a good thing in the end because you don't want all that bulk in the end or the corner of your bag. And mine is actually a little bit close to that corner, but I left it. Tried to figure out how I might get rid of all those raw edges in the seams there, and if I had a zigzag machine, I could zigzag the edge. I also thought you could sew along both sides and just sew those edges down, but in the end I'm going to try this method with some binding, bias binding, and I'm going to open one side and sew right along that seam, and then I'm going to cover the raw edge and sew on the other side. So here I'm going to add that to cover that raw edge. Truthfully, those old bags that I showed at the beginning of this video, using those leftover bench sheet covers, I did not cover the raw edges, and I'm okay with that, but I thought you might want a way to cover those raw edges. So I'm going to roll that bias binding to the other side. I'm going to kind of roll it over those raw edges, and I will top stitch all the way down to the bottom of the bag, and then I'll add another piece to that bottom seam. We have those raw edges contained. I'm going to box the bottom of my bag by folding this little triangle on the bottom and sewing across. And I kind of use my sewing machine bed there. It has lines, and I use just the edge of that cover. What's that called? That silver cover under my needle, the needle plate, I think it's called. I'm going to sew across and put that boxed bottom on my bag. We have another raw edge to cover, and I'm going to use a strip of fabric that's about 1.5 inches wide, and I folded down that first little bit there, and I'm going to sew it. I'm going to attach it to the inside of my bag. There you can see the fold, and I'm going to attach this all the way around on the inside of my bag. When I got to where I had started, I just sewed that tail over the beginning triangle fold there, and I'm going to cut off the excess. And now when I roll that strip of fabric over to the front, I'll cover all the raw edges, and that little fold that I made at the very beginning will contain all the raw edges on that edge too. And then I'll top stitch all the way around. bag is complete, and all I need to do now is add a little handle, and I'm going to use this tan webbing here. I'm going to sew a little kind of a square around each side on top of that webbing, and this bag will be ready to go. This was a really fun little project. I'm going to put some yarn and needles in this bag so that I am ready to go. I'm going to start a new baby sweater, and this bag will be perfect to travel with. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.